This is the Haulin Assets podcast, where we show you how to start and run your own trucking company. Ever wanted to go out on your own? Follow Chris as he goes through the highs and lows of running on his own authority.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to episode 160 of the Haulin Assets podcast. This one is about how to boost your CSA scores. And, well, I should introduce myself. I'm Craig. Over there, he's Chris. And Chris, guess what?
What?
I studied.
You studied?
I studied for this episode.
Wow, good job.
Yeah. I studied for about 15 seconds, and that's how long it took me to Google, wait, what does FMCSA stand for? So I learned. Anyway.
Can you spout it off?
The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration.
Very good. Yeah, nice.
What?
You got it.
People can't see it right now, but I'm brushing the dirt off my shoulder right now. All right. Chris, I want to remind everybody before we dive into this to go to HaulinAssetsLLC.com for show notes. And did you hear that? I put the G in accidentally. There's no G. HaulinAssetsAcademy.com. If you want to take courses that are honestly cheaper than I expected you to price them, but courses that will teach people the skills that they need to jump into owner-operator or fleet building status. So HaulinAssetsAcademy.com. Lastly, also make sure you check out MotorCarrierHQ.com. For tools, tips, people, but also fancy merch. Chris and I both have our cool t-shirts on. I don't think people can quite see them, but you can get your own. So, all right, Chris, housekeeping over. You want to talk about CSA stuff?
Let's get into it. So we're going to start a two-part series. So this is the first of a two-part series where we're going to kind of dive a little bit more into the FMCSA regulations. It's something we've talked a little bit about in the past, but we're going to take a little different twist on it. So in this first episode, we're going to talk about some tips, tricks, tools to boost your safety program and stay off the FMCSA's radar. If you can stay off the radar, life's a lot better. If you don't, and that's where part 2 comes in, and you get in trouble with the FMCSA or you get a warning letter for them, or there's a myriad of things that can happen, we'll talk about some of the things you can do to
alleviate that situation.
And get them off your backs.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So this part 1 then is, they say the best defense is a good offense. Well, if it's a sports metaphor, then the best defense is to not play the game. Don't get them involved if you can help it, right? So
yeah, don't get them involved. And I've said this before: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and there's no more relevance to that saying than when it comes to managing your safety regulations.
Yeah. Speaking of relevant, does it matter what size company you are as far as getting on the radar? If you're an owner operator versus an 11 truck fleet like Haulin Assets or 10,000 trucks, does the FMCSA get more or less involved based on your size?
They basically treat everybody the same. So no matter what size you are, it's important. Even for drivers, a lot of time drivers say, well, this just affects the company, it doesn't affect me. And that's not the case. If they're the driver when a violation occurs on something, that goes on their record, and that's going to affect their employability.
Right.
So it's important for everybody, from drivers to large fleet owners.
Okay. All right. So give me the bottom line up front then. What we'll get into more details, of course, but what are the basic rules here for not getting the FMCSA involved?
Just be safe. It's that simple. Maintain your vehicles, obey the traffic laws, and don't break the hours of service rules. You do those 3 things, you're going to be in pretty good shape.
Okay. Well, that's simple enough. All right, Chris. So tell me about the peaches that are sitting on my desk right now. You brought me peaches, and I need to know why.
I brought you a handful of peaches. And most people don't realize that northern Utah is actually pretty well known for their fruit. Grow a lot of really good fruit, peaches being one of them in Utah. And I volunteer on a nonprofit orchard in my area. So in the spring, I'll help a little bit with the thinning and pruning. In the fall, help a little bit with the harvest. And, so you ask, well, why did I bring these peaches? It's partly because peaches have something in common with the FMCSA and how they manage the safety program, the CSA. So,
is this where you sarcastically say, "Oh, the FMCSA, what a peach"?
well, yeah, that's a good one right there. Yeah, what a peach. Gotta love them. No, what it kind of boils down to, as you go and you harvest peaches, you've got kind of the top or the bottom half or bottom 2/3 of the tree that it's really easy to reach the peaches, right? You pick the peaches, you may stretch a little bit, you may have to do a little hop to get some of the higher ones up on that bottom 2/3. But then to get the peaches that are on the very top of the tree, you got to pull out a ladder. You climb up the ladder, you maybe can reach 3 peaches, climb down the ladder, move the ladder, climb up the ladder, pick more peaches, climb down the ladder. And you just do that all the way around the tree, and it takes forever. It really takes like 3 times as long to pick the top third of the tree as it does to pick the bottom third of the tree. So that bottom third is, you've probably heard the saying, the low hanging fruit.
I was just going to say, we have this saying for a reason.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. That low hanging fruit is really easy to pick. The higher stuff is not, and it's just human nature to focus on and go after that low hanging fruit. And so the same thing happens with the FMCSA and safety regulations.
So sorry, I'm laughing because Chris, you actually brought a bowl of peaches for anybody watching on YouTube. There is a literal bowl of peaches on my desk now, and I just realized this is a Sunday school object lesson. You brought an object lesson to the podcast. I brought
you an object lesson. Yes.
Okay. All right.
A very delicious one, by the way.
I am going to enjoy
these. Are
this.
kind of the early. I'll warn you. The early season peaches. They're not the big, huge, juicy ones that you start to get in maybe towards the end of August into September, October. But they're still good. It's a good start to the year. So yeah, it really is. So the FMCSA is the same way. They're going to go after the low hanging fruit. So they go after the motor carriers that are kind of the most egregious and the ones that are most likely to cause accidents. They're the easy ones, the easy pickings, right? And so
to speak. Yeah. Okay. All right.
So today we're going to talk about what can you do to not be that low-hanging fruit. Or another metaphor, the guy that you don't have to outrun the bear, you just have to outrun the slowest guy. It's kind of the same thing. It's just you have to be in the top certain percentage of motor carriers, and you're essentially not going to get bothered much.
Right.
As soon as you get into that where you're on the radar, it will make your life a living hell. So we're going to talk about staying off of that.
Right. If you can't win, don't play. Yeah. And this isn't a game that you want to try to win. Okay. So how does somebody go about doing that then? We'll get to what if you're already the low-hanging fruit in the next version. But how do you start out on the right foot and get yourself up to the top of that tree? So
to be successful at it, you have to understand how the FMCSA regulations work and how the CSA score stuff works. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So we're going to talk about the basics. And when I say talk about the basics, it's different than the same than when you hear another sports analogy and says, hey, coaches, we're just going to get back to the basics. We're going to focus on tackling or whatever the simple things. And with the basics in the FMCSA, that there's actually an acronym that the FMCSA uses for the categories where they kind of really track different types of behavior. And so BASICS is an acronym that stands for Behavior Analysis and Safety Improvement Categories. So there's these 7.5, kind of 8-ish categories that the FMCSA rates every motor carrier in. And that's where you hear your CSA score is you've got a score essentially in 7 of those 8 categories. The 8th one's more like a pass-fail.
Okay.
The other 7 are actual scores. And so they are unsafe driving, crash indicator, hours of service compliance, vehicle maintenance, controlled substance, hazardous material compliance, and driver fitness. And then the other one is insurance and kind of some just other things that are lumped into that.
Okay. And so I'm seeing this list here in front of me, and they've got percentages next to them. And so are we talking about, it's like a test score? You need to score at or above a certain level to kind of stay off the radar in that category?
It's actually the opposite. You want to be lower.
Oh, okay.
So the percentage basically, so those percentages are thresholds, and we'll get in a little bit more into that. But you basically want to stay below the threshold. So in some of the categories, the threshold's 80%. In other categories, it's 65%. And basically what that means is if your score is 60%, that means you are in the essentially the top 60%. So there's 40% of the carriers that are worse than you.
Okay, so this is a percentile score and not an absolute score.
Yeah, it's where you So they calculate an absolute score that's then used to compare to your percentile where you fall into similar motor carriers, usually based kind of on size. So you're kind of roughly compared to fleets that are the same size as you.
Oh, okay. So when you were saying earlier they treat everybody the same, they at least sort companies into those size categories.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're being compared against other owner operators running one truck. Mm-hmm. You're not being compared with the 1,000 truck fleet.
Correct.
Okay. All right. That makes sense. So do you want to do the percentages and let people kind of know what those are?
Yeah. So the unsafe driving, 65%, crash indicators, 65%, hours of service compliance is 65%, and then vehicle maintenance, controlled substance, hazardous materials, and driver fitness are all 80%. Okay. So in that, those that are 80%, like vehicle maintenance and such, if you're below that percentile, so if you're anywhere from 1 to 79%, you're not really on their radar. They're mostly looking at those companies that are those worst 20% offenders. So you don't even have to be average.
That good. So how does that work then? And, maybe we'll get into this sort of thing. Is it a point system where, we talked, it was a year or two ago, there was a Haulin Assets driver who got busted for controlled substance issues, and you guys parted ways with that driver immediately. But the company gets dinged for that, right? So is it, you've got 1 point in the controlled substance category, and if you get 3, you're in trouble.
It kind of works that way. The controlled substance is a little bit harder because most of the time how they really analyze the controlled substance piece is if you get audited, because they're going to look and make sure that because in our situation, that controlled substance, we'd followed all the rules. Mm-hmm. We had done the appropriate screening. We'd done everything we needed to do. So it's not like they don't really hold that against us because we're doing what we're supposed to. You can't 100% control everything. Now, if we had not done a pre-employment drug test, then we would have been in trouble. Or if you come and you get audited and they see that your one of your drivers isn't part of a random pool, then you're going to get a ding in those kind of situations. That's what's going to increase your score, that absolute number, and possibly take you outside of that threshold. And that one's a little harder to understand. The ones that are a little bit easier, more like vehicle maintenance, hours of service, those are a little bit more kind of cut and dry.
The stuff that's getting logged day in and day out. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. So understanding kind of how the scores work. So you usually get scores in most of these situations from DOT interventions. And kind of like I mentioned, DOT interventions can be an audit, or they, more commonly, the most common type of intervention is a roadside inspection. And as most of our listeners are going to know, roadside inspections typically happen in one of two forms. You either get pulled into a port of entry and they ask you to step aside or drive aside and come to their pit, and they will do a vehicle inspection on you and a driver inspection. Or if in like one of my situations, if you remember early on, I got pulled over for speeding in Indiana, and they did an inspection at that time. So that's kind of the second most common is you have some kind of moving violation on the road, and the DOT officers there sees it, pulls you over. And most of the time when they pull you over for something like that, they're also going to do an inspection.
Which fits right into the narrative you were talking about of stay off the radar, right? It's not worth the extra 5 miles an hour to potentially get put on the FMCSA radar, right?
It's not. And like in my situation with the speeding, it was going through, like I just didn't slow down fast enough going through a town and got hit for something like that. It was like 6 or 7 over. I wasn't going crazy over.
Right. Okay. All right. So this will be good for me because it's a question I've had how these things work. So at port of entry, they just tell you to pull it. Like either they're going to wave you through or pull you into the pit.
Correct. So if you remember, this is what happened to me earlier this year. I told the story of getting pulled in. So I was coming from Wendover. Well, I was actually coming from Elko, Nevada, and passing through the Wendover port in Utah. So I just, Wendover, part of it's in Nevada, part of it's in Utah. And in the Utah port, you get pulled in, they weigh you, and sometimes they'll just randomly select you to get inspected, and that's what they did in my situation. And so there's some things you can do. We'll talk a little bit about this in just a second, that can prevent you from, that reduce the likelihood that you're going to get pulled in. But in my situation, I got pulled in, got an inspection, and obviously, if you remember right, it didn't turn out super well. It could have been way worse. And this is kind of one of the things I wanted to talk a little bit about in the podcast. Is the better your drivers understand the regulations, the more they're going to be able to plead their point. And because I understand the regulations pretty well, I was able to essentially talk about the mistake I made. Understood it. I made a kind of a stupid mental error, and was able to explain to the DOT officer what I'd done, why it wasn't egregious, and why how I made the mistake. And so they were a little bit more lenient with me than they probably would have been otherwise if I hadn't been able to articulate that.
Right.
And so that's super critical, is that your drivers be able to do that. And one of the areas that we make sure our drivers are trained well is agricultural exemption, because when we haul potatoes or onions, in a lot of situations we're able to use the agricultural exemption. But when they get pulled over and get inspected, they need to be able to articulate that well to the inspector. So make sure your drivers have a decent understanding of the regulations.
Right. It's like I'm trying to teach my 8-year-old daughter right now who she's never met a rule that she didn't want to flagrantly violate. And I keep trying to tell her, sometimes it's okay to break the rules, but you got to know the rules and know how to follow them first before you can, start skirting those edges. And let's just say she hasn't gotten that yet, Chris.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit kind of like how the scores are calculated. So when you have an inspection, a roadside inspection, if they find a violation, you're going to get a certain number of points for that violation. And, if it's something really simple, like a form of manner in a logbook, like say you forgot to add the shipping document to your logbook, and they want to ding you for that, that's going to be a really low violation.
Right.
If you've driven 12 hours and you're only supposed to drive 11 hours, that's going to be a more serious violation.
Right.
So you're going to get more points for it.
Okay. So this is golf. Low score wins.
Good. Yeah. And you can actually, if your inspection comes in clean, you get 0 points. So then what happens, and I'm going to really kind of oversimplify this. In the show notes, I've got some links to some FMCSA documents that if you want to like completely nerd out and really dive deep into this, you'll be able to pull up some of those documents and read through. Just fascinating material.
No, Chris, I already studied for this episode. I don't think I need to do anything
more. Your 15 seconds is that you're tapped out?
Yeah, I'm good. What is this, school? Come on.
But basically the way that it works is they take, you've got your bad points for those violations.
Okay. Don't tell me there's
we're-
good points too.
There are good
No,
points.
no.
When you have a good violation, or not a good inspection with no violations,
Right.
you get good points. The good points go on, and you divide.
This sounds so much like kindergarten. It's killing me.
Well, I'm trying to keep it simple, and I'm oversimplifying
Yeah.
it. This is basically how it works.
Right.
There's a lot of math involved, and it can get kind of confusing because they also use a time weight measurement with this. So the more recent the violation, the worse it's going to count for you. So in the worst totals during the first 6 months, then it steps down a little bit from 6 months to a year. And then it steps down again a year to 24 months. And then after 24 months, it's completely off the record.
Interesting. Okay.
So again, you've got the good points and the bad points. And what they do is they divide the bad points by the good points. So the more good inspections you have where you've got good points is going to lower your score. So you can essentially get, say you've got one inspection that turned out really bad, got a lot of points. But if you've got, 4 or 5 other good inspections, that's going to significantly impact that score and bring it down lower where you want it to be. So getting inspections isn't bad. Like that's one of the reasons with our drivers, if they have a good inspection, we pay them $50.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, because it's good. It helps the company. It helps everything. So that's kind of basically how it works, and that's what gives you that raw numerical number. Then they compare your number to all the other motor carriers, essentially in your roughly same fleet size, and then from there they develop your percentage. Are you at the 50% mark, where 50% of the carriers are worse than you and 50% are better than you? That's how you get that percentage number.
Okay, and so it's a number that's been that you have cultivated for the last 2 years of your company's history.
Yeah, it's 2 years of history. Yeah.
Okay, all right,
and
cool.
they basically, that number gets recalculated every month.
Right.
Every month to 6 weeks, roughly.
How often can one driver expect a surprise inspection?
That's a really good question. In the 1 year that I was on the road, I got pulled in twice. Well, I'd had 2 inspections. One, I was pulled in at a port of entry, and the second one
was the speeding
ticket.
Right.
So it's not super common. Like
this isn't happening on a weekly basis to a driver.
So let's talk about 2 things that can make it so you're less likely to get pulled into a port of entry.
Okay.
So the first one is essentially something about anybody can do. We use what's called pre-pass. Pre-pass is a system you'll see.
I've seen the signs.
You see the signs.
Yeah.
Most states now at the ports of entry, they have a pre-pass sign, and you'll see this big scanner thing kind of scan across, usually just the right lane, because they make all the trucks drive in that right lane when they approach a port of entry.
Right.
And it'll scan, and if you've got a pre-pass system, it'll give you a red light or a green light. If it's a green light, you bypass the port of entry completely, and you don't even have to go, pull in and get weighed. If it's a red light, then you pull in and get weighed. So if you're using pre-pass, automatically, like, depending on a few things, you may only get pulled into a port of entry 10% of the time. So that obviously significantly reduces the likelihood that you're going to get inspected, because you're not even pulling into the port. So I think using pre-pass, that in and of itself is a great reason to subscribe to pre-pass. And it's only like $20 a month per truck.
Okay.
So it's not super expensive. Plus you save on fuel because you're not stopping. You're saving on your driver's time. It's ease. It's lots of good reasons to use it. The second thing, and this is probably a little lesser known score, but probably one of the more important scores that there is out there, and it's called the ISS, or Inspection Selection System. And so basically what that is the FMCSA scores each motor carrier based on what they think your safety record is.
Okay.
And they put it into this system. And what that says is you've got 3 kind of different categories. You've got pass. So anybody that has a score from 1 to 49 gets a pass. And what that means is when you get pulled into a port, it means that inspection's not warranted, And so unless they're just doing complete random inspections,
Right.
you're probably not going to get inspected.
Interesting. Okay.
So
I can kind of see where this is going then.
Yeah, so
with a snowball effect.
there's a snowball. Yeah. So, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So
Yeah.
the second category is optional, and that's anybody with a score of between 50 and 74. And what that means is there is an inspection warranted, and they're kind of the next priority level.
Mm-hmm.
Then the third one is inspect. And if you have an ISS score between 75 and 100, your inspection's warranted top priority.
And it's gonna happen
Unless they're like backed up and super busy, you're getting inspected.
And okay, so what that means in my mind then is, there's, we can talk about the snowball effect, but let's say you're in that top category, you're in the inspect category with a score over 75. Do you want to get inspected at that point? Because if you can do it right, if you're actually taking care of everything, then getting more and more inspections could lower your score more quickly.
It can.
Again, if you do it right.
The opposite, if you're doing it wrong,
that's where the snowball comes in, right?
It can get really bad. So usually what happens is, you've got this ISS score, and if you get above one of the thresholds or multiple of the thresholds, then guess what's going to happen to your ISS score? It's going to increase.
Right.
And you're going to get into that above 50 category, or potentially even above the 75 point category where you're getting inspected. And so when that happens, that just means you're getting more interventions, you're getting more interactions with the DOT. If you're not correcting your problems, then your score is going to get worse, your threshold's going to get worse, you're going to have more violations in different basic categories, and
you're screwed.
You're essentially screwed especially if you're not fixing things. You're going to get a DOT audit. Like if they see this trend getting worse and worse and worse, then you're going to get audited, whether you like it or not. And so that's why it's so important. This ounce of prevention it is worth a pound of cure. You want to keep yourself first under the 50% of the ISS, so you're not getting inspected very often. I mean, our trucks, we have a score under the 50%. Our trucks, of our 11 truck fleet, we probably get 12-ish inspections a year.
Oh, okay.
Not that many, probably even less. I should have counted it. I would say probably even less than 10.
Yeah. Well, it's a two-part episode,
maybe we
Chris.
can talk about that next time.
Count it for next time.
But you want to keep that ISS score below 50%. And then if you do get above 50% and you are getting inspected on a more regular basis, you want to be extra careful and make sure your trucks are very well maintained, your drivers are obeying the hours of service rules, so you get more of the good inspections. Because if you get more, that's going to decrease your raw score, decrease your percentage, get you out of the threshold, and then your ISS score is going to improve and you're going to get inspected less. So you can control this, and it's important that you do, and you want to keep those numbers good, or if you don't, the FMCSA is just going to ratchet tighter and tighter and tighter around you, because you are that low-hanging fruit. You're the carrier that they think is going to get more likely to get into a crash, and they're going to be they're going to scrutinize you.
I was just going to say, this is, as you're talking about all this, it's fun to kind of poke fun at government agencies for just being, annoying little monkeys on your back or whatever. But sometimes we have regulations for a reason, Chris.
We do.
And it's it's not let's say it's worthwhile to find those I was about to say bad apples, but those bad peaches, right? And cull those from the group if necessary, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, this is all, it makes sense, I guess, as not all government regulatory issues do.
and trust me, like the FMCSA is overworked, undermanned.
Sure.
They can't audit every company out there. They're going to only go after the ones they think are the worst and have the greatest potential to be involved in an accident. And so don't be that guy. Run faster than the next slowest guy when you're getting chased by a bear. Don't be the low-hanging fruit, and you're probably not going to be bothered.
And and it's not just about being bothered per se. I mean, you were talking about getting the, what you call it, fast pass? Pre-pass, thank you. The pre-pass, it makes you more profitable potentially if you're not stopping, if you're able to do a few more miles than you could have otherwise. You're eating up more road, that's more profit for you. So it's not just about following the rules for safety's sake. Obviously, that's the primary reason. But hey, you've got a vested monetary interest in this as well.
Yeah, and I don't want people to feel like they have to be perfect. Like the FMCSA doesn't expect anybody to be perfect. I mean, you look at our situation. I've talked about a few violations I've got. The worst violation that our company has right now. Guess who did it?
You.
It was me. Yeah. It was that Elko, that Wendover inspection. So you don't have to be perfect. We're still under the threshold and everything. And in fact, in a lot of situations, we're well under the threshold.
Right.
And so you don't have to be perfect, but you do have to be conscious. And if you're conscious about it and you're deliberate about how you manage your safety program, chances are you're going to be better than most everybody else. And,
right.
And you're going to be okay.
Well, that kind of it speaks to something that you've talked about in the past, which is that hiring is incredibly important, which if you, as you don't really drive as much anymore as you did in that first year. So if you have the worst score in the company, then that speaks well of the people you've hired, right? So hiring, like I say, you've talked about this in the past, it's incredibly important. You want to do it well. So what have you guys done to make sure that you're hiring good drivers who are going to follow these rules?
So anytime you hire a driver, you have to pull their motor vehicle record.
Right.
So that's a given, and that'll show you traffic violations and things like that. The other thing that's not required that I think is equally or possibly even more important is the pre-employment screening program that the FMCSA does. It's not very expensive. Like it's just a nominal charge to do this. But you can basically go in when you hire a driver, you have them sign a disclosure saying you're going to pull their information. Then you can go into the FMCSA system and pull any violations that would hit your record.
Right.
And they can, and you can see if the driver has a tendency to have hours of service violations or maintenance violations. Maintenance is part driver, part company, because the driver has to let you know there's an issue, and then the company has to repair it. You look for all those things, and if you see a trend, if somebody has one violation, I'm probably not going to hold that against them too bad. But if they've got multiple,
like of the same thing,
or just multiple hours of service violations, like even if they're of different things, I'm gonna be a lot more leery about hiring that person.
When you as a company, when Haulin Assets brings somebody on as a new driver, do you inherit their scores?
You don't.
No. So it's not like
you're not inheriting it, but
but you see the pattern.
Past performance is a good indicator of future performance, right?
Right. Okay.
So don't hire those drivers that have multiple issues, because all it takes is one bad apple. Even in our small, the smallish 11 truck fleet, one driver with multiple violations will decimate our scores.
Right.
I mean, you can't afford to have one person come in and spoil a whole bunch.
Right.
Of peaches.
I laughed, Chris, because did you know you have a don't be an idiot face? And when you said don't hire that driver, and people not watching, they can't see, you're turning so red right now, but they couldn't see the face, but it's like your face says this is so easy.
It is.
Just pull the report.
Please pull the report.
Don't be an idiot. Yeah. Well, okay, there you go. All right. So anything else on the kind of prevention side of this for this episode that you want to talk about before we move on and do another episode on the subject?
One more quick little couple of things that you can do that kind of help prevent you. So no matter how good your ISS score, you're going to get pulled into ports every once in a while.
Yep.
And, don't give the port folks an excuse to pull you in and get inspected. So some of the things, as I've talked to port people and inspectors over the years, that kind of draws attention to them is if they can see an obvious violation of a vehicle maintenance issue, a missing mud flap, a tire that's obviously bald. Those things are things that they can see as you're driving your truck past the scale. Don't let those things go unfixed. Fix them immediately, or lights that are out.
I was just gonna say, you taught me that 5 years ago. Yeah. Don't light your truck up like a Christmas tree, because it's not worth it.
It isn't. And even like if it's during the day, I will turn all my lights off just in case there is something that's out, just because you don't have to run with lights.
Right.
And so I'll just turn everything off so they can't, if there is something that went out, they're not going to see it. At night, you can't do that. But so stuff like that. And then also, I mean, this seems kind of ticky-tacky, but the cleanliness of your truck. Like if you've got, every once in a while you'll see these trucks that are like black. Sometimes in the winter you can't prevent that.
Right.
But in the summertime, like if they can see you haven't washed your truck in 4 months and it just looks terrible, they're going to say, well, they don't care. They probably don't care about their maintenance. There's probably issues. You're more likely to get pulled in. So just be cognizant of those things.
Okay. All right. Very good. Well, we will come back with a part 2. Is there going to be a financials episode between these two?
I think we'll do the financials, and then it should be
and then we'll do a part 2 on this particular issue. What to do if you're in the hole and you want to climb out of it, or no, it's a tree. So if you're at the top of the tree, or no, you want to. You know what, Chris?
If you're at the top, if you're at the bottom, you want to
climb to the top. Yeah.
Or if you want to work out a little bit and get faster than the slow guy.
There you go. My analogies are all mixed up today, Chris, and I blame you. And it's because I've been distracted by looking at these peaches this whole time, and I'm hungry now. All right. Thanks everybody for listening. Don't forget HaulinAssetsLLC.com, HaulinAssetsAcademy.com, and MotorCarrierHQ.com. Visit them all. Experience the wonder that is the Haulin Assets network of websites. And we will talk to you all next time.
See you then.